As amazing as e-bikes are, buying one can feel like a big commitment. And unless you have someone to walk you through the process, it can all be a little intimidating. That's why I recommend Upway. Upway sells certified pre-owned e-bikes at discounted prices. And while saving money on an e-bike is a huge benefit, another thing that sets Upway apart is just how easy it is to find the right model and get riding right away. As Maxime Renson, the head of Upway US, told me, even though Upway does everything online, the company offers a personal touch, so your experience is as simple and accessible as possible.
You can have a video call, a FaceTime call. You have a real person showing you the bike that you're interested in, or showing you the 5 bikes you're interested in and telling you why one out of these 5 is the most suited for you.
As soon as you pick out your e-bike, Upway specialists will get it ready for you to ride.
Once we have received your order, we're going to pack that bike, so we're going to protect it very well, and then we'll ship it to you. If you live close by Brooklyn or LA, we will be able to deliver that bike fully assembled, not boxed, directly to you. So you get the bike, you remove a bit the foam, and that's it, you have your bike. Then you have 2 other methods for longer distances. You have one that is using the classic UPS, FedEx network. These bikes, the price for the delivery experience is a bit cheaper because you're going to get the bike with the front wheel off and the handlebar off and also the pedals off. So you'll take around 15 to 20 minutes to assemble that bike. If you're not comfortable with that, you can pay a bit more and then you get that bike fully assembled.
To top it all off, Upway guarantees each bike, not only with a 1-year warranty, but with easy returns.
Our return policy, it's a 14-day money-back guarantee. You can ride the bike for 10 miles. If you're not happy with it, you can return it, no question asked. It's a real investment from Upway on trust and just reliability.
And if you have an e-bike you're looking to sell, Upway makes that easy too.
You go on the website, you get a quote in literally 10 minutes. You just fill out a couple of information. We'll send you a quote. Then what we do is we send you a box to box the bike, unless you are close to LA or close to New York, which are the 2 locations where we have an up center. And then we send you a FedEx to pick up that bike. Simple as that.
So if you want to experience one of the easiest ways to buy a certified pre-owned e-bike, visit upway.co and check out their amazing selection. Each e-bike you find online is ready to be packed up and delivered right to your door within days. And if you have an e-bike you want to sell, Upway can offer you a quote in minutes. Now through the end of October, if you purchase an e-bike through Upway, you can save $150 off any order over $1,000 with code WARONCARS. Find the right e-bike for you and get riding right away at upway.co.
Welcome to the War on Cars. I'm Sarah Goodyear. With me in the studio is my co-host, Doug Gordon.
Hello.
It's good to see you again. You've been away.
Yeah, I was in London, Poland, and Barcelona for a conference in Poland and bookended the trip. So hard to come back to the US.
Yeah, I was in Brooklyn, which I love, but I'm a little
It's the
envious.
Barcelona of New York.
There we
Brooklyn.
go.
Yeah, both start with B.
That's right. So today we are going to be talking about something a little closer to home, the Trump administration's full-on financial assault on all of the modes of transportation that we hold dear here at the War on Cars. Biking, walking, public transit, basically it's all under attack. It is the war on cars, you might say.
We covered some of this in our Project 2025 episode, but I don't believe we thought it would be quite as bad as quickly as we talked about back then.
I think that is the 2025 mantra. We didn't think it was going to be this bad this quickly. 2025. Anyway, before we get into that, we have a guest here who's going to be helping us understand what we are up against, but we've got to get a little business out of the way. First of all, you can pre-order our new book, Life After Cars, Freeing Ourselves from the Tyranny of the Automobile, wherever books are sold.
And it's coming out on October 21st. But if you pre-order the book before then, you will get some really fun bonuses that we've just worked out with our publisher. It's really cool. Everybody who pre-orders, you'll get access to a live virtual Q&A with Sarah and with me and a special guest to be announced. You will also get a little toolkit poster of like ways to imagine life after cars or win the war on cars. Suitable for framing, we're told. We haven't seen it yet. We're still designing it.
Yep. And Patreon supporters who pre-order get even more fun stuff, which includes signed book plates, an exclusive downloadable street sign artwork designed by a listener.
Yes.
Fantastic. And this is the super fun part, personalized video responses from me and Doug to your questions. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, if you've ever thought, why aren't Sarah and Doug on Cameo, for example? Now it's happening.
I know. Yeah. I think people often ask themselves that question.
Right, yes.
Anyway, you can find out more about how all of that works at lifeaftercars.com. You'll also find links there to all our upcoming tour dates. More events are being added all the time. It's pretty exciting.
Yes. And remember, you can always find and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thewaroncarspod. So thanks.
Let's get to our guest, who is joining us remotely from Washington, D.C., Ted Mann. He's going to explain what is going on with federal transportation funding for active transportation projects. Ted is a reporter at Bloomberg News who has been covering this story as it has been evolving. He is also the co-author of Lights Out, Pride, Delusion, and the Fall of General Electric. Ted Mann, welcome to The War on Cars.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we're so thrilled to have you because for transportation nerds in the New York metropolitan area, you're kind of a big deal. We all remember you as the person who broke the Bridgegate story for the Wall Street Journal back in 2013. Just quickly, that was the scandal that emerged when some traffic lanes were closed on the approach to the George Washington Bridge in Fort Lee, New Jersey, in what appeared to be an act of retribution against the mayor of that city for not supporting then-Governor Chris Christie's bid for re-election. And those closures caused a massive traffic jam, and the fallout became a national political story.
The famous phrase, time for some traffic in Fort Lee, right? That came from that. That scandal seems almost quaint today.
It totally does. The notion that intentionally messing with transportation in the greater New York City area, the notion that that is scandalous is quaint and old-fashioned.
And it had a really big impact on the Republican primary in 2016 for the presidential election, widely considered, I think, to be one of the things that kind of made Chris Christie much less competitive than people thought he was going to be.
The scandal blew up at a really inopportune time for Christie, because that was right when he was expecting to pivot from a blowout re-election victory into starting the fundraising for his presidential campaign. And instead, they were busy mopping up a scandal for months. And it really, held him back from what would have been the outset of the bid for the nomination.
Right. And here we are today.
So on Earth 2, President Chris Christie is in his,
It's like the butterfly effect, but with
a traffic cone by an exit ramp to the George Washington Bridge.
Yeah, exactly. But Ted, so you are an expert of sorts in political wheeling and dealing to do with transportation. And that's really what you've written about in this article that was all over my social media feeds the other day. And it has the headline, Trump cancels trail bike lane grants deemed hostile to cars. Can you tell us what's going on with this story?
The folks at the Trump administration DOT, including Sean Duffy, are going through grants from discretionary programs that have previously been awarded to cities and counties all over the country. There's one known as RAISE, which used to be called Infra, which used to be called Tiger, but essentially it's a pool of discretionary money that cities and towns can apply to for things like street safety programs, bike lanes, pedestrian trails, traffic calming. These have been pretty non-controversial grants and programs, including the money that went out during Trump's first administration. There's a whole other program called Safe Streets for All. And this time around, they're going back through grants that have already been awarded and they're clawing them back from the recipients. And in various forms, at least according to the letters that we've seen, they're saying this does not prioritize automobile travel and, single drivers moving around in cars through this city, and therefore it's not in keeping with our policies. So it really is the war on cars.
It's probably worth pointing out that RAISE stands for Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. And so perhaps those two words, sustainability and equity, got flagged in some sort of AI Doge-related purge. Not that they wouldn't have gone after these things anyway, but it's certainly part of it.
I think that's right. We're seeing all over the place, including the cuts that Russ Vought announced yesterday on funding for Gateway and for the Second Avenue subway, where they're sort of applying the anti-equity consideration frame. But then also there have been, from the outset, from Duffy, there have been indications that they don't like bike stuff. It was in one of the early memos, there was a reference to bicycle infrastructure as something that they would, this is my paraphrase, but view skeptically. So yeah, it's tough to know exactly where they're coming from, other than the language in the letters, where in a couple of these instances, they've used that phrase, this is hostile to the automobiles, almost like it's hurting the car's feelings.
I have to stop on that, which is, it's not saying these grants prevent more people from moving through the street. These grants are not good for people. It's really that they're not good for cars.
It's almost anthropomorphizing the vehicle.
Yeah.
There was one of the letters, I think it is one of the ones sent to Boston. Boston had a couple of grants pulled back that essentially said, we're looking at your project and it's making it less auto-centric, which is exactly what would have been put in an application under, the previous administration. And instead, that was grounds for revocation of the money.
Before we move on too far, because we should talk about each of these projects, like you mentioned the Gateway and Second Avenue stuff, that literally just broke yesterday as we're recording this. And one of the things that they said was that the DBE, or Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, was the problem, which could you explain what that is for our listeners?
Sure. First of all, it's a law passed by Congress that federal monies, including DOT grants, when they go out to recipients, so those would be state entities like the MTA or the Gateway Commission, or in some cases counties, there are supposed to be set-asides when public money is going to pay for big projects that are intended to steer some of the business to firms that are from historically disadvantaged demographics. So in other words, minority-owned contracting firms, women-owned contracting firms. This is longstanding federal policy. It's in the rules. There's still, at least I haven't checked this morning, but there's a webpage on the DOT's website all about this program, because it's something you've got to abide by if you take their money to build something. And as of 2 nights ago, DOT has turned this on its head. They're referring to a couple of recent court decisions to say that all of that is unconstitutional, and therefore any recipient of a grant who took into account historically disadvantaged communities when they were deciding who would get the contracts under that grant has now violated the Constitution, and those monies can be frozen or pulled back. Some of this is, in the view of, the MTA and the state officials, they see this as sophistry, right? Because really what's at stake here is the administration wants to fight with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. And right now, what's useful to them is being able to hold back some of this money. And so I think there is this question of how much is this, speaking of Bridgegate, how much of this is just the weaponization of the DOT as part of this political gamesmanship that's going on, and how much of it is something that they're really going to be serious about going forward. So if the issue is we're holding back a $300 million reimbursement until the government reopens and then MTA will get its money, that's a problem, but it's not as big of a problem if what they're actually saying is all $18 billion of the money for these two projects are now back up in the air, because we've decided that the entire way that DOT has administered grants like this for many years, decades, is no longer valid, that creates a whole other problem.
And we should probably just explain that the Gateway Project is the tunnel connecting New Jersey with Manhattan. Amtrak goes under there. New Jersey Transit goes under there. These are tunnels that are more than a century old and, have been on the verge of collapse for decades at this point.
Yeah.
That's right. And they're a pain point for New York. And just as they did in the first Trump administration, the DOT is sort of using that, squeezing on this project because they know that it's an essential project for New York City, and that gives you leverage over Schumer.
Chris Christie, way back, I think in 2010, was using this project as leverage in his political rise to not the highest point where he thought he was going to go.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back because, yes, some of this is targeted at Democrat, quote unquote, states and regions, but the rescission of these biking and walking grants is actually affecting lots and lots of places that are red states, quote unquote. And, you give the example of a project in Fairfield, Alabama, for instance, right?
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
Sure. Fairfield is, little city in Alabama. They're a good example of a community where there's no other option. The city clerk, when we called, said, we don't get the grant, the whole thing doesn't happen. This isn't San Diego, which is now scrambling to find the money somewhere else, and they probably will be able to because it's a big economy. There are lots of little communities that applied for this money because they want a little bit of what is being built all over the country for themselves, a safe place to ride your bike, a convenient way to get across town that you could do on foot instead of having to get in a car. And I think that sort of, as you said, there is this sense that all of these projects, all of this non-vehicular infrastructure is essentially liberally coded. This is for blue cities. This is for yuppies in Patagonia, fleeces, and that's just not at all in keeping with what's actually happening out in the country. That people of all political stripes like to be able to ride a bike and not get hit by a car. It just is true. We had a quote in the story from Kevin Mills in the Rails to Trails group, basically saying there's this idea that this is only for one part of the country, but really the appetite at the local level is very broad, and it's not subject to some partisan divide or even a MAGA, anti-MAGA divide. And so I think that's one of the most interesting pieces about going after this entire mode, or sort of every mode that isn't the car, is that you're going to hit a lot of places where there's actually tremendous public support for just making it a little bit safer to cross the street.
We'll be right back after this break. Fall is here, and the weather is unpredictable this time of year. You can always be ready with a Cleverhood Rover 2.0 rain cape, which will keep you dry on foot or on bike through all the changes. Check out their wild new limited edition Stormy print. It's a colorful pattern based on NOAA Doppler radar data. The vivid, eye-catching pattern keeps you more visible in a car-centric world. And like all things Cleverhood, it will help keep you moving forward toward a life after cars. For 15% off everything in the Cleverhood store, head to cleverhood.com/waroncars and enter code LifeAfterCars. That's cleverhood.com/waroncars, code LifeAfterCars.
Okay, we're back. Could we maybe go through some of those projects? We mentioned Boston. You mentioned specifically this case in Alabama, but what is the Boston project? Albuquerque, San Diego, what are these projects that are being clawed back?
One of the projects in Boston is basically just a road safety overhaul of the neighborhood of Mattapan Square. And the Albuquerque plan is the continuation. They're nearing the end of this long-term effort to do a bike trail going all through the city. And they're at this downtown piece that required a chunk of federal money to be able to complete the circuit. There's a similar project in Illinois where going back to the 1990s, was when they started planning a bicycle trail, a mixed-use trail, pedestrian and bicycle trail that would go all the way across this county in Illinois from one county line to the other. And it's a place where you have railroads. I believe the railroads are on the northern edge and there's highway on the southern edge. And so this is really providing a transportation alternative that didn't exist in this county and that they're almost at the point of finishing finally. But now it's been interrupted by the cessation of that grant.
You know, this reminds me of back in February, we had Beth Osborne, the executive director of Transportation for America, on, and she was talking about the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, saying, you know, we're going to come after transit. We're coming after transit. And she was pointing out that if you look at the list of transit agencies, and there are about 1,000 agencies on that list, what she told us was they're overwhelmingly in smaller and rural communities. And the people who are doing this are, I think, sometimes don't even realize that. They can be sort of shocked, she says. When you show them the list, they're like, oh, wait, those are the communities that allegedly I'm supposed to be in favor of, these small rural communities that are in what MAGA people would call the real America.
Mm-hmm.
But transit has become so left-coded, as you say, and biking as well, that just all seems to go out the window. And it's really, it doesn't seem like there's any kind of legitimate policy rationale here. It's really an ideological stance.
I think that's right. Or certainly they haven't given us a policy rationale. I was just looking at one of the letters that flew in over the transom. This one was sent to, I believe this was the state of Delaware, but in one of their rejections, they just say, the project runs counter to DOT's priority of focusing the multimodal grant programs primarily on projects that promote vehicular travel. Know why we're pivoting away. And I do think it's true that it is seeming like an ideological project, and it doesn't exactly match up with the politics. Again, Kevin Mills' example was Florida, which has a really aggressive trail construction program ongoing. That is now a ruby red state, obviously. Ron DeSantis is the governor, but there's a good network of trails and they're expanding it and building it. So it's not like there is something that is essentially partisan here. It's just been sucked into the broader sort of polarization project that is sweeping over everything.
I'm only laughing because, you know, they're basically saying, look, we're taking all the multimodal grants and we're focusing it on one mode. Like that's
right.
Like,
your multimodal is too multi.
Right.
Right. And also they talk about vehicular traffic, apparently unaware of the definition of the word vehicular, which is a vehicle can be many different things, including a bicycle or a bus.
Well, bikes are only vehicles when you want cyclists to follow the rules of the road. They're not vehicles when they're entitled to space on the road. That's different.
That's when they're toys.
Yes, that's when they're toys. You know, I think one of the interesting things that I have noticed in reading your reporting and other stuff about this terrible news, they're talking about this being hostile to cars, and that's why they're pulling some of this stuff back. But they're pulling stuff back that doesn't actually take space from cars. If we were talking about Sean Duffy saying, hey, your project repurposes travel lanes away from cars and gives it to bikes, or it narrows crossings for pedestrians, and that requires the removal of dozens of parking spaces. So, hey, we're going to take your funding, and that all has to be parking and car travel lanes. I could sort of get my head around, you know, sitting in the shoes of a Republican at the US DOT. But we're talking, in some cases, like you just said, about off-street trails that do not take space from motor vehicles whatsoever. And I think that speaks to the ideological piece of this. Like anything that seems to threaten the primacy of cars, even if it's your ability to just move, as you said, from one side of town to the other in a completely car-free space that wouldn't otherwise be for cars, that's on the chopping block too.
Yeah, that's right. And so some of these, they are reducing a lane or they're striping a bike lane in part of a space which is only signaled for cars right now. But in others, as you say, yeah, these are totally off street. This is just improving trail networks. Then there are other examples, and this is in the clawback of, in particular, some of the Safe Streets for All program grants. You can see that the objection is actually just this might slow down the cars that are moving there now. One of the rejection letters to Boston says, your project includes several elements that impede vehicle capacity and speed. Like, literally, that's the point of the Safe Streets for All grant.
Right. We want drivers to go a little slower so they don't hit people, or when they do, people are not killed.
Right, to go the speed limit so that you don't kill somebody. But yeah, so that's the case. In some of these projects, they are rejecting something that would have reallocated lane space to a bicycle. But in other cases, they're not even taking any physical space away from the cars. It's just trying to create space for other modes and also to make the cars go the speed that the city wants.
The specific project I was thinking of that you wrote about was the Route 66 bike trail in McLean County in Illinois that was basically following the path of Route 66 and just allowing cyclists some space that would not have taken space from drivers.
Right, and that's the one that they've been working on for decades, slowly piecing it together just to try to create this alternative. Again, not at all impeding anyone from driving across the county in a car, but giving you another way to do it, which is actually safe. And that was one of the ones where when we called the local government, they were saying, the sponsors are not giving up by and large, at least the ones that we talked to. There are some who, as in the Alabama example, there's just not an alternative. There's no money in that city's budget to do this without the federal help. And in other cases like McLean, what they're trying to do is scrounge anywhere else they can find. And I think they've already applied for an Illinois State DOT grant. So they will be looking for alternatives, but it is completely scrambled, in many cases, these efforts that are years in the making to build this stuff.
One of the things that the Department of Transportation said to McLean County was that they were canceling this because they needed to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used efficiently in ways that maximally benefit the American people and improve, and this is the important part, improve their quality of life. It's like, what improves your quality of life more than being able to just hop on a bicycle or walk across the street? It's just maddening that the only definition of quality of life is your ability to get in a expensive car, fuel it up with expensive gas, and sit in traffic and go.
And pollute the air of your community and
make your neighbors less safe.
And make yourself less healthy. It's really chilling, actually. And I guess trying to find some hope in this, you're talking about ways that communities and municipalities can try to fight back against this. What are the mechanisms that states and cities and towns and counties have to try to continue these projects? I'm sure it's case by case, but what are some of the levers available?
In some cases, it's going to be simply finding the money at other levels of government that are not hostile to this kind of infrastructure being built. So if there's a state DOT that can give you a grant that can sort of patch together the financing plan that way, that will be one option. I'm sure there will be attempts to do fundraising from the private sector and from foundations where they can where the loss here can be cobbled together. There's going to be self-help in some cases. I think in a lot of cases there's going to be delay. You're going to have to postpone stuff that might otherwise have been in construction, probably not this year, but in the spring. It's also the case that going back to January 20th, when this administration came in, they'd started hitting pause on all sorts of this stuff, including some of these grants. Some of these recipients had already received a letter saying, by the way, we're reviewing these 7 awards that you received over the last 2 years or whatever. And so in some cases, I'm thinking of Albuquerque here and the official that we talked to there, that grant, there was no fully funded grant agreement because it was being reviewed, whatever that meant, by the DOT. So everything has just been frozen. And you can't, without the grant agreement, you can't start spending money. You can't start working on the thing. So the silver lining of this getting clawed back from Albuquerque is what they told us was, okay, now we can go get the money somewhere else and get back to work. They've just been sitting there for 9 months waiting for something to happen. So there will be a little of that too. And I think that some of this, assuming that the administration doesn't suddenly change its posture here, some of this stuff will be built, by states and cities and counties and other entities without the federal government's help until there's an administration in power that isn't opposed to this stuff ideologically.
But isn't there also cases where if a city or a county has entered into contracts and contractors are working and those contractors need to be paid, they've done the work, can't entities find themselves in a pretty scary legal situation where they're not able to pay a contractor's bill, and who's got the legal liability for that?
Oh, yeah, certainly. This is where we have all, in the past few months, had to learn a lot about the difference between obligated and unobligated funds. I think, at least according to the people we've been talking to, the administration is on firmer ground to pull back some of these awards, where you've essentially won, you've put in your application, you've been awarded a grant, but it's not been obligated yet. For those that are not obligated yet, it's going to be a lot easier for Duffy to just pull the awards back. For those that are, or where there is, as you're saying, work underway and invoices to be paid, you need to look at that response we got from Boston, which seemed to be essentially saying we're reserving our right. I think there will be legal action if they go through with some of this stuff.
This is going to upend everything. Also, because if I am one of those contractors, I own a concrete company or something, and in the future I get some contract from the government to, build a bike lane or a trail, I'm going to want that money up front. I'm not going to basically sit there and say, I'll trust the federal government to reimburse the state or the city, but I'll do the work in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, are you going to bid if there's an RFP for a bike lane somewhere and it's county saying we have a federal grant to pay for part of it? Like, are you going to bid watching this? I don't know.
Or a gateway tunnel project in the billions of dollars, not a bike lane in the millions of dollars.
One of the biggest factors all over the world in deciding whether to put investments into infrastructure is political risk. And we are in an environment of tremendous political risk.
Yeah, and the fact that the cost of raw materials is also incredibly volatile because of the on-again, off-again tariff situation, and that the cost of labor is also going to probably be changing in unpredictable ways because the construction industry is having a huge part of its labor force
rounded up and deported
and put into concentration camps, essentially. So the uncertainty that you're talking about in a nation where, when I started covering these issues 20 years ago, it was all about, crumbling infrastructure, and kind of trying to get ahead of the crumble and try to build some infrastructure for the new century that's now already a quarter over. And it seems like it's just going to slow that down again.
Yeah, that's right. And just to your cost overrun point, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it was yesterday or the day before that Brightline West, my colleague Martin Braun, wrote about how their cost estimate for that project has just soared and they're blaming material costs.
That's the LA to Vegas train. Yes.
The almost LA to the almost Vegas train.
This is probably the point of any episode where we would say, what's the hope? What should people do? It can feel a little difficult to really even pose that question because I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I guess just off the top of my head, I think if you are in a red state, if you are in Florida and you enjoy cycling on that lovely trail system that they're building in Texas, in Florida, elsewhere, you call your Congress people and say, what's up with this project? Like, my health and safety depend on it. If you're a contractor, same thing.
I actually was wondering, Ted, I had heard from someone I spoke to who is from Florida, who is somewhat involved at the governmental level in this stuff, who said that actually being in Florida might be your best bet because you can, make your supplication directly to the administration, and because they favor the state of Florida, you might be able to get some of this back again. Are you hearing any of that?
That is a theme that we are reporting on, about how broadly the pain will be shared of a lot of their fiscal policy. The cuts, not just transportation cuts, but this stuff and lots of other stuff. And we don't really know yet to what extent everyone, red state and blue state, will see things like this happening, projects being clawed back. But certainly, if you look at the way other things are going on in Washington these days, it seems like there will be states and delegations that have a better chance of getting their aid restored or getting their favorite policy looked kindly upon by the administration. But that's something where we're just going to have to keep reporting on it and watching it as this year and the next year unfold.
So if you want a good bike trail in your state, donate a gold-plated bicycle to hang in the new ballroom that they're constructing next to the White House, I guess.
Which, as someone pointed out to me the other day, is going to be disrupting traffic on the 15th Street bike lane for like the next 4 years or something. So
our friend Alyssa Walker pointed out that everywhere Trump goes, by the way, like public transit increases because he just screws up traffic for everybody else. So maybe we just need to send Trump to every part of the country and we can get people on board with using public transit and biking.
Or I'm imagining that the mode that will be favored for transport to the ballroom will be actually horse and carriage, a la, sort of British royalty, like the beautiful gold encrusted carriages with plumed horses
and whale oil lanterns.
Exactly, deliver you at the portico of the ballroom.
Right, like how far back do we want to turn the clock? Actually, is really the question we're talking about here. I do wish we could end on a more hopeful note. I do think it's important to lay out the stakes, and your reporting, Ted, has been really valuable in terms of laying out exactly what these projects are. And I think, to the point of your piece, that this is being felt in red states and deep red states, like you said, like Florida, as well as liberal enclaves like the Northeast, is an important point to make here. So we'll stay on top of it. Hopefully have you back with better news, I guess.
I would love that.
Yeah, and I think for me, the hopeful part is that there are reporters like Ted who are reporting on this as a systemic threat to the progress that we have been making in this country. And so, yeah, Ted, keep it up. We really need what you're doing.
We need good reporting, so thanks.
Well, thank you so much. Keep up the good fight.
That's it for this episode of The War on Cars. Another thanks to Ted Mann for joining us here. You can find Ted's reporting at Bloomberg News. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Remember, you can support us and get exclusive bonus content, pre-sale access to live shows, free stickers, and more by signing up on Patreon at patreon.com/thewaroncarspod. A big thanks to everyone who supports us, including our top contributors, Charlie G. of Human Powered Law in Portland, Oregon, Mark Hedlund, Virginia Baker, and Brandon DeCoster.
And please, pre-order our new book, Life After Cars, Freeing Ourselves from the Tyranny of the Automobile, and find us on tour this fall. Learn more about ordering and fun pre-order bonuses at lifeaftercars.com.
Thanks also to our friends at Cleverhood. Listeners of The War on Cars can save 15% on everything in the Cleverhood store now through the end of October with code LIFEAFTERCARS. For the best gear for cycling and walking, go to cleverhood.com/waroncars.
And thanks to Upway. For a great deal on a certified pre-owned e-bike, visit upway.co and save $150 off any e-bike order over $1,000 with code WARONCARS now through the end of October. Again, that's upway.co.
The War on Cars is produced with the generous support of the Helen and William Mazer Foundation.
This episode was edited by Yesenia Moreno. It was recorded at the Brooklyn Podcasting Studio by Walter Nordquist.
Our theme music is by Nathaniel Goodyear. Transcripts are by Russell Gregg. Our logo is by Danny Finkel. I'm Doug Gordon.
And I'm Sarah Goodyear. And this is The War on Cars.